For the period of time that new media has been in existence, whether under the banner of art and technology, cyber arts, or new media, collaborations have been a highly visible avenue of production. Within the greater new media genre, there have been numerous collectives such as 01001, the Mates.org, Jody, Entropy 8 Zuper, eToy, Ceto.org, Beige, Artmark, the Institute for Distributed Culture, the Institute for Applied Autonomy, the Critical Art Ensemble, Lemur, the Yes Men, and many others. And although it's quantitatively hard to prove, one may even be led to consider whether new media's origin in technology and computation, and thus coevolution with digital networks such as ARPANET, might have created a native culture from which collaborative artworks are a natural extension. So, from this, can one say that the collaborative impulse in new media is a direct reflection of its indigenous culture, underpinnings, and technical evolution? Possibly the collective or network culture was forecast at least 40 years ago by McLuhan with his pronouncements of the global village, which really sound a lot like 21st century forms of social media. But is new media and its native culture specifically conducive to collaboration? In this discussion, I'll look at cultural conditions of new media, its necessities, its problems and benefits. In addition, I'll take a look at some models of collaboration that I've either studied or participated in order to compare different ways in which new media artists create together. Practically and theoretically, the foundations of new media culture are deeply rooted within the evolution of electronic networks preceding the internet. Of course, as I said before, McLuhan foresaw this communal nature through this idea of the global village, in which he says, we cannot but know about one another. This is because of our televisual involvement in the networks, and although he was hypothesizing future television, which we could possibly equate to the webcam, his pronouncement also hinted at spaces like MySpace, wikis, possibly the access grid. Although he was considering telephony, teletype, and television networks, his thought was clearly a vision of media as a social space. His global village, then, in many ways, might have been similar to Web 2.0 with its emphasis on social interactions and content generation. But what seems to be more important is his thought of the social. That is, the extension of the human organism and its community through nets. Now, thinking about Deleuze, his metaphor of the rhizome is also well known in the development of our understanding of thinking regarding the interconnectedness of wired individuals and their interaction with themselves and their media. In his essay, Rhizome versus Trees, Deleuze posited that network discourse follows the massively enmeshed but non-hierarchical, undifferentiated social structures like the root systems of strawberry plants. For some, this is a metaphor for shallow, quick, rapidly moving strategies in which engagement with the subject is far less than with previous pre-network forms. That is, while the previous hierarchical form of social structures, that is, once again, pre-networks, is built around protocols of privilege and legitimation. The rhizomatic culture, then, privileges the ad hoc and the collective. One prime example of rhizomatic media, of course, once again, might be Wikipedia with its ever-changing structure and content defined by its user base. But although this consideration is relatively cursory, the rhizomatic social space does represent a holistic and possibly intrinsically collaborative environment. In this social milieu, though, the interdependence, or at least interaction, between disciplines is then written into the operating system of culture. Lastly, thinking about Baudrillard in his Transparence of Evil, he puts forth the idea of cultural transparence, in which cultural attributes of different genres expand to ubiquity throughout that given milieu. That is, in a media-saturated society, sports become politics, politics become pornography, art becomes war, war becomes a video game, and capitalism becomes sports. So on, so on, so on. Baudrillard argues that this is to the fact that media saturates, transmits, and conflates entire categories to the point where all points in culture become inextricably linked as its root node becomes drained of all meaning itself. This infiltration includes all areas of the arts, sciences, and the humanities at this time. This mandates that in the massively networked age, not only are we next door to one another, McLuhan, massively interconnected, Deleuze, but our disciplines of research, creation, and discourse are unavoidably permeating one another. From this, is it really any surprise that new media arts collaborate? Therefore, it seems sensible to consider collaboration as a possible default position in networked culture, and to one degree or another, it seems like it could be unavoidable. Through McLuhan, Deleuze, and Baudrillard, among others, these are only three, one can argue that the analysis of and creation within electronic and contemporary culture may encourage an enmeshing of people, projects, and disciplines that are indigenous to online networked new media culture. One of the defining aspects of much new media is the scope of disciplines, including engineering, computer science, as well as the arts and humanities that are involved. The necessity of interdisciplinary collaboration has historical precedents, such as Rauschenberg, Kluver, et al.'s experiments in art and technology. EAT brought artists and engineers together to explore the applications of technology to fine art, initially resulting in 9 Evenings, Theater and Engineering, a 1966 event in which 10 artists and 40 engineers explored the possibilities of technological art. However, the symbiosis needed for art-tech collaborations was surely evident. As Kluver said, it became clear that achieving ongoing artist-engineer relationships would require a concerted effort to develop the necessary physical and social conditions. While this alludes to more of bridging C.P. Snow's divide between the two cultures of the arts and sciences, it also declares the necessary symbiosis amongst the disciplines of the creative enterprises. EAT also further formalized a tradition of technology's influence on art and the interdisciplinary nature of technological art through the establishment of the EAT network. It's very much worth noting that what began as an experiment of roughly 50 individuals became a community of thousands, validating the cultural relevance of interdisciplinary collaboration in technological cultural production. Of course, we can see this in new media, in which the web started out with a couple of sites, a couple of communities. Now we have things like Rhizome, NetTime, The Thing, NetBehavior, etc. So, another example of this necessity of interdisciplinary action is in computational art is also illustrated by Jim Campbell in his diagram for computer art, which is a update of the classic diagram put forth by A. Michael Nolan in his essay Computer as Medium. Campbell's extension of the ubiquitous von Neumann system infers any sensible input as data, including depth, for an interactive work. In addition, the data remapping that Campbell illustrates the computer performing has outputs devices as fanciful as rain generators. Could it be assumed that it would be an exceptional individual indeed who could engineer microprocessor art, contextualize it, and be a rainmaker as well? Perhaps so, if Clarke's third law, which is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, is any indicator. However, Campbell, taken in context with Clarke, doesn't illustrate the artist as prodigious solitary individual, but an artist with a robust technical and collaborative network, if only for technical support. In so doing, we can see that from our archipelago of art and tech practitioners like EAT, Knoll, and Campbell, that few individuals have all the skills for new media pieces, mandating larger or smaller collaborative networks. The benefits of collaboration. We've been discussing the necessity of collaboration, but are the precedents from which we can draw inferences regarding the benefits from collaboration as sustaining force in cultural milieus? Jolene Blay, in her 2006 essay, Indigenous Domain, Pilgrims, Permaculture, and Pearl, she makes arguments for the idea of permaculture, that is, the creation of wealth without doing damage, in global culture as a whole and digital culture in specific. In her essay, she mentions that indigenous cultures practices offer free cultures of catchment, circles, and care. These include the importance of the gift economy, value of the process of creation, and the collection, that is catchment, of free assets for collective benefit. These can be expressed in everything from water basins in the physical to the open source movement in the digital. Of the three concepts, which is most interesting to me is the idea of catchment, especially in context with the work done by Ippolito and Blaise et al. At Maine called The Pool. This project is created by Blaise, Ippolito, Mike Scott, Owen Smith, and so on at University of Maine, which is an online catchment of assets, texts, skills, and resources for the stimulation of the communal wheel. This project, in all of its three iterations, looks at different aspects of collaborative interactions, social willingness, and intellectual property. These translate to collaboration, the defocusing of attribution and licensing, and ironically, student hesitation to this release of effort and resource. To derive some sort of metric from these interactions, the team created tools to follow the social structures in the project, such as the associative interaction mapping tool they call the social grapher. Within the grapher, the pool facilitators are able to look at degrees of integration between users rather than separation, and the degree of collaboration that students employ during their waiting around in the pool. Interesting metaphor. A point to this is that while many of the students become, while being wary of issues of intellectual property, and that many only have one participant in projects, as seen in this picture here, students will still seek communities with others. This is also seen in this next picture here, illustrating 3 degrees of connection as generated by the grapher. Although this is one of only one instance in the study of digital sociology and collaboration, the conclusion could be derived here is that although contemporary culture encourages protection of intellectual capital, the individual still seeks collective action in a robust way. The politics of collective gain. So far, the conversation has ranged from the theoretical, pragmatic, and to some extent altruistic aspects of collaboration. However, socioeconomic political realities of collective action in an age of global networks also align themselves towards the collective. And as a site of cultural production, it may be said that new media's reflection of the collaborative milieu merely reflects this reality. Ghosh's anthology, Code, Collaborative Ownership in the Digital Economy, explores numbers of examples of socio-political issues related to collaboration in the digital society. These include arguments for collaboration as survival strategy, pragmatic political reality, and even as a baseline of human collective biology. This last argument is where Clippinger and Bollier's essay, A Renaissance of the Commons, a little bit longer than that, but is situated. They take a polemic stance against Smith-Lockean individualistic market philosophies, stating that in the age of the internet and coming years, there's a reemergence of the commons that is essential to the very essence of human existence. In fact, they state, they quote, "Scientists are coming to believe that many social behaviors that are crucial to the commons, social reciprocity, trust, shared values, have played a practical role in assuring human survival and adaptation. So much so that there is evidence to consider whether these aspects of human development could be a long-term threat to free market democracy, as the history of human collective action and biology run counter to the market." Furthermore, they cite that research that posits that social exchange constitutes an evolutionary stable strategy, reciprocity being part of human neurobiology necessary to the formation of civilization, and that free market choices actually reflect flocking behavior. This is a really radical position, suggesting that in its most logical extreme, Western modes of individualism and competition in economics or even art production are counterintuitive to history and human biology itself. Following from this assertion, it could be said that millennial culture is counterindicative of the past and possibly even the future of human existence. This is not to say that competition is not part of the development of the human species, nor was Hobbes in his Leviathan that he was wholly incorrect about human existence being nasty and brutish and short. But what is suggested is that cooperative interaction has figured far greater in the social and biological development of the human species, and that cooperation seems to be the norm rather than the exception. From this, it would be interesting to consider whether in the long run the community mural, or possibly even the graffiti wall, might actually turn out to be the true Gesamtkunstwerk of humanity. Collaboration, 4 flavors. This discussion has analyzed some of the pragmatic, theoretical, biological foundations of new media collaboration. But what is important as the theoretical is the experiential record of this mode of production. There have been many different collaborative models within new media collectives, far more than are going to be discussed here. It could even be hypothesized that each collective project has its own specificities unique to it and it alone. What follows are encapsulations of a few collective methods that I've been either studied or been part of, and I offer them to you as embodiments of possible exemplars of the principles stated earlier in this essay. In these brief analyses, I'd like to consider the various groups' production models, their benefit sharing, and attribution distribution schemas. The strange case of Artmark, the monolith. Artmark, which was a anonymous online collective of anti-corporate activists who came forth to challenge corporate power through subversion of liability displacement in the 1990s, maintained its cultural opacity throughout all of its operations through utilization of the corporate veil. Going by names like Frank Guerrero, Ernest Lucha, Max Kaufman, Candida Lucida, and an army of other names of semi-anonymous and anonymous individuals, this amorphous group marshaled various resources through the participants' complementary backgrounds. In addition, the very structure of Artmark as cultural mutual fund and subversion clearinghouse created a network in which the company acted as a channel for blacklisted cultural production through which few or many could be enlisted at will as needed. This faceless, obfuscating, monolithic corporate structure was also perfect for the Artmark Collective, as it focused the attention on the work and not on the possible individuals who may or may not have worked on it. This structure could be adept in its conceptual displacement of the participants from their cultural and possible legal transgressions, but also creates a form of mythology. This legend is, of course, of the entity that may be everywhere or nowhere, extant or not, in legion, numerous or small. The methods of attribution are brilliant in themselves, as while artists involved could not exactly claim involvement except in inexact terms, as the Artmark Collective was everywhere a playful cultural insurgency before that post-millennial panic. In many ways, Artmark served as a Duchampian catchment refuge for dissension, subversion, and critical intervention. Therefore, Artmark was everyone, yet no one, allowing it to be wherever it needed to be. Second Front, the hub with spokes. A Second Front is the name of an avatar-based performance group in the online world called Second Life, founded by Jeremy Turner, Vancouver, aka Worksley Flim Flam, Doug Jarvis, aka Transpire, and myself, I go by Man Michinaga. We created this in 2006. Each of us had an interest in virtual reality for a number of years and comes from that tradition involving artists such as Shar Davies, Jaron Lanier, Greg Little, Cynthia Rubin, Margaret Dolinsky, and many others. However, although we discussed a collaborative for some time, there hadn't been a venue which really seemed to have the right confluence of mainstream recognition and usabilities of tools to seem worthwhile. However, with Second Life's recent popularity, including the 2007 Postmasters showing of 010010110110, oh forget it, the Mate's 13 Most Beautiful Avatars, provided an impetus for a free-form online venue for performance for much larger audiences than other VR-based spaces, such as There.com or OnLive Traveler, which Mr. Turner had done a great deal of work in. This collaborative method of Second Front is based on a procedural method using a listserv. For example, ideas are thrown out to the group, and the 9 to 12 members, whatever the time, democratically refine the concepts. For major ideas such as script finalization, web development, PR, and so on, individual members take the initiative in creation and then vet the results through the listserv. Over the first 6 performances, this flat democratic method has worked with very few difficulties, as the members have related that they feel that they have a good consensual social contract. But as mentioned earlier, credit distribution is an important component of artistic production, and in many cases artists will create derivative works from collaborations. Therefore, how does one credit the artists who have helped in the singular works of artists in such a collaboration? In the case of Second Front, there are 2 important points. All the videos, graphics, etc. We've licensed them under Creative Commons Attribution licenses and for free use as long as proper credit is given. From this, individual artists are then free to create derivative works given the provision that they also credit the group, such as Penny Brown and Second Front. This method, while different from the Artmark monolithic form of crediting, still distributes credit widely as both the artist and collective are recognized. In many ways, Second Front acts as a catchment from which the constituent members contribute, share, pull into the individual works, and then return the shared benefits to the collective. The Gears, Clevelander Z. Clevelander Z is a installation-based surveillance collective founded by ex-Clevelander Laura Rusnak at Bowling Green State University in 2005. CZ, as they like to be called, came together over discussions revealing common sensibilities regarding social justice and the society of surveillance. Where most of CZ have a baseline of mutual competencies such as flash, electronics, familiarity with theory, and conceptual sensibilities in most of the other areas, the formation of the group realized a near dovetailing of expertise, that is, hardware versus code, imaging versus design, creating a really highly efficient collaborative unit. The unusual aspect of the collaboration is that while many groups have specialized participants that may or may not be able to perform installation duties, talks, etc., the CZ Collaborative, as 07, have bodies of expertise that mesh through a baseline of common knowledge. This meshed complementary configuration creates a highly useful parity in regards to presentation of the material. Now, in regards to accreditation, CZ operates similar to Artmark, except that it is not anonymous. The works that the participants attribute to CZ are wholly collective in nature, making no distinction of role. In many ways, this is another form of collective catch base in regards to cultural production, and CZ considers this an effective and beneficial model. The organization, Terminal Time. Lastly, another collective that has had an interesting collaborative model was that of Dominik, Mateus, and Vanaus's interactive history documentary entitled Terminal Time. This audience-driven, real-time historical documentary consisted of hundreds of movie and text clips, minutes of animations, and an extensive AI engine requiring the efforts of guest artists, tens of production assistants, and hundreds of participants. The role distribution varied from videography, editing, writing, programming, interfacing, sound, and programming interfacing in AI. Therefore, Terminal Time in all these examples is probably unique in its scope as a singular project and more like a small movie company rather than a new media project. From this, the organizational structure of Terminal Time appears much more reflective of once again, of a traditional media production. In the closing credits, the structure is apparent, as we see the principals, additional collaborators, production assistants, actors, and so on in a traditional media production hierarchy, possibly even illustrating a set of concentric rings of involvement. Phenomenologically speaking, Terminal Time offers an insight into the confluence of new media, industrial models, and traditional media production. As with many projects involving numerous participants, resources of all categories become an issue, and productions of the scope of Terminal Time may demand hierarchical organization like more traditional collaborative works. Therefore, we wonder whether larger new media projects with numerous categories of interdisciplinary specialization and levels of expertise still require traditional roles in order to function within existing institutional and foundation funding models. This is merely an idea that I'd like to suggest to all of you, but I'm also curious as to how other support models might work at these larger scales. Conclusion. So, throughout this discussion, I've considered the cultural origins, necessities, and benefits of collaboration in the new media culture milieu, as well as 4 models of artistic collaboration and legitimation. As a caveat, I'd like to say that there are far more, as there are models used by many of the names mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, and those mentioned here are only chosen for issues of familiarity. By following the trajectory of cultural roots, disciplinary scope, resource requirements, and the distributed nature of contemporary culture, one could argue that new media could be an outgrowth of distributed culture. From that rhizomatic interdisciplinary milieu, the collective gesture makes sense as form of culture expression, and thus the discussion of new media and collaboration is a logical progression of contemporary art discourse. As genres such as social media continue to develop, the nature of collaboration may change radically in the coming years. F. Clippinger and Bollier are correct. Collectivism in new media may reflect the return of the commons and possibly even the nature of, reflect the nature of human neurobiology. But what seems to be a remaining factor in contemporary new media is the element of group action, whether in creation or participation, and this in itself could be an interesting field of study in the coming years.